The meeting hall stretched wide across the floating station, its crystal walls showing the swirling colors of deep space. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in their special chairs, each designed for their unique body types. Some breathed different air, others needed special gravity fields, but all of them shared one thing. They didn't want humans in their club. Captain Rodriguez stood alone at the center of the massive room. Her dark uniform looked plain next to the flowing robes and glittering armor of the alien delegates. She had traveled farther than any human before her, carrying the hopes of an entire planet on her shoulders. Earth had sent their best diplomat, their smartest negotiator, their most patient leader. None of it mattered now. "The decision is final," announced the tall, blue-skinned council leader. His voice echoed through translation devices, reaching every ear in a language they could understand. "Humanity is too young, too aggressive for membership in the galactic community." Around the room, alien heads nodded in agreement. The bird-like Avirians ruffled their metallic feathers. The rock-solid granite people tapped their stone fingers on the table. Even the peaceful energy beings flickered with approval. They had all agreed. Humans were dangerous. Rodriguez felt the weight of failure settling on her chest. 800 years humanity had dreamed of this moment. 800 years since they first detected signals from other worlds and knew they weren't alone in the universe. Generations had worked toward this day, building the fastest ships, learning alien languages, preparing perfect arguments for why Earth deserved a seat at this table. "We understand your concerns," Rodriguez said, her voice steady despite the crushing disappointment. She had practiced this speech during the long journey to the council station, hoping she would never need it. "Humans have fought wars. We've made mistakes, but we've also learned from them." The council leader raised one of his 4 arms, silencing her. "Your species has destroyed entire cities in single attacks. You've wiped out other forms of life on your own planet without thought. Your entertainment celebrates violence. Your children play games of war." Other delegates murmured their agreement. They had studied humanity for decades, watching their movies, reading their history books, analyzing their behavior. What they saw frightened them. Humans seemed to enjoy conflict in ways that civilized species had evolved beyond. "You speak of learning," continued the council leader. "But your wars never truly end. They pause, they shift, but they continue. You carry grudges across generations. You remember every slight, every injury, every wrong committed against you." Rodriguez wanted to argue, to defend her people, but she knew they were right about some things. Humans did remember. They remembered Pearl Harbor and the Holocaust and September 11th. They remembered the Armenian tragedy and the Rwandan horror and 1,000 other dark moments in their history. Other species seemed puzzled by this habit, this need to build memorials and hold ceremonies for events that happened before anyone alive was born. "We remember because we promised we would," Rodriguez said quietly. "We remember because forgetting dishonors those who suffered." The energy being representative pulsed with what the translation system interpreted as confusion. But why burden future generations with past pain? Why not let old wounds heal and move forward? Rodriguez looked around the room at faces that couldn't understand. These beings had grown beyond such primitive emotions. They had learned to forget, to forgive, to move past their darker histories. They saw human memory as a weakness, a failure, to evolve. "Because some things shouldn't be forgotten," she replied. "Some promises are too important to break." The council leader made a dismissive gesture. "These emotional attachments to the dead serve no purpose. The dead are gone. They cannot be helped or harmed. Dwelling on past suffering only creates more suffering." Rodriguez felt something shift inside her chest, a hardening that surprised her with its intensity. She had come here hoping to join this community, to learn from these advanced civilizations. But looking at their faces, She realized they had learned the wrong lessons from their evolution. They had gained technology and lost something essentially important. "You're wrong," she said, and her voice carried a new edge. "The dead aren't gone. Not as long as someone remembers them. Not as long as someone carries their stories forward." The room fell silent. Even the mechanical humming of the station's systems seemed to pause. Rodriguez realized she had crossed a line, speaking, with passion instead of diplomacy. But she couldn't stop now. "We made promises to our ancestors, to our children, to everyone who ever died hoping for a better future. We promised we would remember them. We promised their suffering wouldn't be meaningless. We promised that justice would eventually come, even if it took centuries." The council leader's skin color darkened, showing irritation. "Justice? What justice can you provide to those who no longer exist?" Rodriguez smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You'll understand someday. When the time comes to fulfill our promises, we'll remember who stood with us and who didn't." She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Behind her, the delegates whispered among themselves in their various languages. Most dismissed her words as typical human dramatics. They had expected emotional outbursts from such a primitive species. Only the Zephyrian delegate, with their advanced memory systems, recorded every word exactly as spoken. Something about the human's tone troubled them. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was certainty, as if Rodriguez knew something they didn't. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The galaxy forgot about the strange human promise, dismissing it as the ranting of a rejected species. Humans continued their expansion into nearby star systems, building colonies, developing new technologies, but always staying within their assigned borders. Until now. Deep space monitoring stations across the galaxy picked up the same impossible readings. Massive energy signatures blazed from the Sol system, unlike anything in recorded history. The readings suggested power levels that should have torn planets apart, yet somehow Earth and its colonies remained intact. Something was happening in human space, something that would soon remind the galaxy exactly what promises humans had made, and why they should have listened more carefully 800 years ago. Dr. Chen stood before the Terran Council chamber, her hands shaking as she held the datapad that contained humanity's greatest secret. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of environmental systems, but she could feel the weight of 800 years of preparation pressing down on her shoulders. "Today we fulfill our promise," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The council members leaned forward in their seats, knowing this moment had been planned since the day Captain Rodriguez returned from that fateful meeting with the galactic community. Behind Chen, a massive holographic display showed the Sol system as it appeared to long-range sensors. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid belt glowed with structures that hadn't existed just months ago. The galaxy was watching, trying to understand what humanity had built in the darkness between the stars. "The memorial arrays are online," Chen continued, her voice growing stronger. "All 16 billion souls are ready for activation." Council Leader Williams nodded slowly. He was old enough to remember his grandfather's stories about the rejection, about the promise Rodriguez had made. "Dr. Chen, please remind us exactly what we're about to do." Chen touched her datapad, and the holographic display changed. Now, it showed not stars and planets, but something far more complex. Streams of quantum data flowed like rivers of light, connecting nodes that stretched across space and time itself. 800 years ago, we made a promise to the dead. Not just our dead, but all the innocent who ever suffered without justice. We promised we would remember them. We promised their pain wouldn't be forgotten. We promised that someday, somehow, justice would come. She paused, looking around the room at faces that understood the magnitude of what they were attempting. These weren't politicians or generals. They were scientists, engineers, philosophers, people who had spent their entire lives working toward this single moment. What the galaxy never understood, Chen said, is that we meant every word. The technology behind the memorial arrays seemed impossible even to the humans who had built it. It had taken centuries of research, diving deeper into quantum mechanics than any species had dared to go. They had learned to read the quantum signatures, left behind by consciousness itself, to trace the echoes of thought and memory that persisted even after death. Every person who ever lived leaves traces, Chen explained to the council. Quantum impressions of their thoughts, their emotions, their experiences. Most species learn to ignore these traces, calling them meaningless noise in the background of reality. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. We learned to listen instead. The breakthrough had come 3 centuries ago, when Dr. Peterson discovered that consciousness wasn't just electrical activity in the brain, it was a quantum phenomenon that created ripples in space-time itself. These ripples could be detected, analyzed, and, under the right conditions, reconstructed. We built the first prototype memorial in secret, Chen continued. A small facility on Europa designed to contact just one person, a child who had died. In the London bombings of 2089, when the quantum resonance field activated, we didn't just read her memories, we brought her back. The council members shifted in their seats. They had all read the reports, but hearing it spoken aloud still sent chills through the room. The little girl had awakened in the digital realm with all her memories intact, as if no time had passed at all. She asked for her mother, Chen said quietly. We had to explain that 700 years had passed, that her mother was long dead, that we had brought her back, not for her own sake, but to fulfill a promise. From that first success, the project had grown beyond anything they had originally imagined. The memorial arrays weren't just resurrection devices, they were quantum, archaeological systems capable of reaching across centuries to touch the consciousness patterns of anyone who had ever lived. We focused first on those who died unjustly, Chen explained. The murdered, the oppressed, the forgotten. We gave them form in our digital realm and asked them a simple question. Do you want justice? The answer had been unanimous. Yes. The arrays can reach anyone, anywhere in the galaxy, Chen said, her voice filled with quiet pride. Every species that ever existed, every individual who ever died with grievances unresolved. We spent 800 years building a network that spans space and time itself. Council Leader Williams stood up, his face grave. Dr. Chen, are you telling us that we can contact the dead of every species in the galaxy? Not contact them, Chen replied. We can bring them back, all of them, every victim of every atrocity ever committed. 16 billion human souls are already waiting in the digital realm, but they're not alone anymore. They've been joined by trillions of others from across the galaxy. The holographic display changed again, showing a vast network of consciousness that stretched beyond human space. Dots of light represented individual souls, connected by bonds of shared experience and mutual understanding. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. They remember everything, Chen said. Every moment of their lives, every detail of their deaths. They remember who hurt them, who failed to help them, who forgot them after they were gone. And now, after centuries of waiting, they're ready to introduce themselves to the galaxy. She touched the final control on her data pad. Across the Sol system, the memorial arrays began to pulse with energy that defied known physics. Space itself seemed to bend around the installations as quantum fields reached across impossible distances. The promise is fulfilled, Chen announced. Let the reckoning begin. The signal came at exactly noon, Galactic Standard Time. Every communication device in known space suddenly carried the same transmission, regardless of what channel they were tuned to. Phones, radios, military networks, even the simple message. Systems on cargo ships, all of them spoke with one unified voice. Commander Blake was reviewing supply reports on the human colony ship, New Hope, when her communication panel lit up. But instead of the usual static from the relay stations, she heard something that made her blood run cold. "We are the remembered. We are the voices you tried to silence. We made promises to the living, and today we keep them." The voice wasn't human, wasn't alien. It was both and neither. Billions of different tones speaking as one, creating a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Blake had heard about the memorial arrays, had even helped transport some of the equipment years ago, but she hadn't truly understood what they were building until now. On the bridge of her ship, the crew stood frozen as the transmission continued. For too long, the galaxy has forgotten its victims. For too long, the powerful have acted without consequences. For too long, justice has been delayed. Today, the delay ends. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on thousands of worlds. Alien commanders stared at their communication systems in disbelief. How could a single signal reach everywhere at once? How could humans broadcast across impossible distances without using the standard relay networks? The answer came quickly, as reports flooded in from border systems. Human ships were appearing out of nowhere, not using hyperdrives or jump gates or any known method of faster-than-light travel. They simply materialized in space as if they had always been there. But these weren't the same human ships the galaxy remembered. These vessels pulsed with energy that sensors couldn't properly identify. They moved through space like living things, changing direction without thruster burns, accelerating without visible propulsion. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to know exactly where to go. Admiral Torres watched from the bridge of the Retribution as his fleet approached the Kethvar system. The slug-like aliens had built their empire on the backs of slaves, capturing weaker species and forcing them to work in their mining colonies. For 800 years, they had grown rich while their prisoners died in the dark tunnels beneath. Alien worlds. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, "the Kethvar defense fleet is moving to intercept. They're demanding we leave their territory immediately." Torres smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Tell them we're here to collect a debt, one that's 800 years overdue." The Kethvar commander's response came through the translation system with typical arrogance. "You humans were rejected by the Galactic Council. You have no authority here. Leave now or face the consequences." That's when the impossible began to happen. The Kethvar weapon systems simply stopped working. Not damaged, not destroyed. They just refused to fire. Across their entire fleet, every gun, every missile launcher, every defensive system became as useless as scrap metal. "What's happening to them?" Torres's tactical officer asked, staring at the sensor readings in confusion. "Justice," Torres replied. Finally, after all these centuries, justice. The Kethvar ships hung helpless in space as something began happening to their crews. One by one, the alien slavers started experiencing something they had never felt before, the exact pain and terror of every being they had ever hurt. It wasn't physical torture. No human weapon touched them. Instead, each Kethvar found themselves living through the memories of their victims. They felt the crushing weight of the mining tunnels, the burn of toxic gases in their lungs, the despair of working until death with no hope of freedom. Captain Vextar of the Kethvar flagship Dominion collapsed on his bridge as waves of alien memories flooded his mind. He experienced the death of a young Zephyrian female who had been worked to exhaustion in his mines. He felt her confusion and fear as she realized she would never see her family again. He lived through her final moments as her body gave out from overwork and malnutrition. Then came another memory and another. Hundreds of deaths, thousands of moments of suffering, all experienced by beings who had died to make him rich. Vextar tried to scream, but no sound came out. Around him, his crew writhed in similar agony as they faced the consequences of their actions. But the humans didn't kill them. That would have been too simple, too quick. Instead, something fundamental changed in the Kethvar minds. When the memory downloads finally ended, they found themselves unable to cause harm without feeling every bit of pain they inflicted. Their capacity for cruelty had been replaced with forced empathy. "This is impossible," gasped Sub-Commander Krixtal from his position on the floor of the bridge. "How can you make us feel their pain? How can you force us to experience what is already past?" Torres's voice came through their communication system, calm and patient. "Because we kept our promise. We told the dead that their suffering wouldn't be forgotten, that justice would eventually come. You're experiencing the fulfillment of that promise." Within 3 days, the entire Kethvar Empire had collapsed, not through military conquest, but through the complete transformation of its people. Freed from their cruel nature, the former, slavers immediately began releasing their prisoners and dismantling their mining operations. They couldn't do otherwise. Every act of cruelty now caused them unbearable empathy for their victims. News of the Kethvar transformation spread across the galaxy at light speed. Other empires that had built their power on the suffering of others watched in horror as human fleets began appearing near their borders. The message was always the same: face your victims, experience their pain, and choose whether to continue your old ways or embrace something better. The galaxy had spent centuries dismissing human emotion as primitive weakness. Now they were learning that human memory, human empathy, and human promises were the most dangerous forces in the universe. The dead had waited patiently for justice, and finally, after 800 years, their patience had been rewarded. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of the Kethvar Empire's collapse. Ambassador Zixhari of the Zephyrian Federation stood at the center of the great chamber, her crystalline features reflecting the panic that filled the room. Around her, representatives from dozens of worlds whispered frantically in their native languages, but the translation systems carried the same message in every tongue: fear. "The humans have broken every law of physics." "We understand," Zixhari announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Their ships appear without using known propulsion. Their weapons don't emit energy signatures. Most importantly, they seem capable of reading quantum impressions from beings who died centuries ago." Council leader Vorthok, his blue skin now pale with worry, leaned forward in his floating chair. "How is that possible? Consciousness doesn't leave quantum traces that can be detected after death. Every scientific study confirms this. Every study conducted by our science," Zixhari corrected. "We assumed that because we couldn't detect these traces, they didn't exist. The humans spent 800 years proving us wrong." The holographic display in the center of the chamber showed the devastation across Kethvar space, but it wasn't the kind of destruction anyone had expected. Cities stood intact, infrastructure remained functional, and the population was alive and healthy. What had been destroyed was something far more fundamental: the entire social structure that allowed some beings to profit from the suffering of others. "They didn't conquer the Kethvar," observed Representative Trillath from the Avarian Collective. "They transformed them. Every former slaver is now physically incapable of causing harm without experiencing their victim's pain. How is such a thing possible?" Dr. Kethmore, the Council's chief scientist, activated his datapad and shared his analysis with the group. "We've been studying the reports from Kethvar space. The humans didn't just access the memories of dead slaves, they integrated those memories into the neural patterns of living Kethvar. It's as if they created a permanent empathy link between oppressor and victim." The implications sent a chill through every delegate in the room. Each species represented had their own dark history, their own shameful secrets. The peaceful Zephyrians had eliminated undesirable genetic traits from their population through selective breeding programs. The wise granite people had strip-mined entire worlds, treating the ecosystems as expendable resources. Even the energy beings had consumed lesser species during their early expansion phase. "We need to understand what the humans want," declared Council Leader Vorthak. "Are they planning to do to us what they did to the Kethvar?" As if summoned by his words, every communication device in the chamber suddenly activated. The same unified voice that had announced humanity's awakening now spoke directly to the Council, bypassing their security systems effortlessly. "We want nothing from you that you haven't already taken from others," the voice said, carrying the weight of billions of consciousnesses speaking as one. "We want acknowledgement. We want understanding. We want you to face the truth of what you've done." Vorthak tried to maintain his composure, but his hands shook as he responded. "We are a civilized people. We have evolved beyond the primitive conflicts of our past. We seek peace and cooperation among all species." The response came with a sound that might have been laughter, if laughter could carry the pain of countless lifetimes. "You seek peace by forgetting your victims. You call it evolution to ignore the consequences of your actions. But the dead remember what you choose to forget." The chamber's holographic display suddenly changed, showing not star charts or battle reports, but faces. Thousands of them, then millions, representing every species in known space. These were the forgotten ones, the eliminated, the consumed, the strip-mined, the experimented upon. All of them looking directly at the Council, with eyes that held both accusation and hope. "We offered you a choice 800 years ago," the human voice continued. "You could stand with us in remembering the dead, or you could stand alone in forgetting them. You chose to forget. Now the dead have chosen to remind you." Representative Trillath spread her metallic feathers in a gesture of submission. "What do you want us to do? The past cannot be changed. The dead cannot be brought back to life." "Can't they?" the voice asked. "You're looking at them right now. Every face on your display represents a consciousness we've recovered from the quantum. Traces of their death. They're as real and aware as they ever were, and they have questions for you." One by one, the faces began to speak, not in anger or hatred, but with simple, devastating questions. A young Ythmari child asked the Tyrellian delegate why his people had decided her species was too primitive to deserve existence. An elderly keeper asked the energy beings why they had consumed his consciousness during their expansion, treating his thoughts as nothing more than food. The questions weren't accusations. They were requests for understanding. After centuries of death, these beings simply wanted to know why their lives had been considered expendable. "We didn't know," whispered Representative Kolmar of the Tyrellian Consortium, staring at the faces of an entire species his people had eliminated. "We thought you were just animals. We didn't understand that you were truly conscious." "You didn't ask," replied the Ythmari child. "You decided we didn't matter without ever trying to communicate with us." Around the chamber, similar conversations began as delegates found themselves face-to-face with their species' victims. What followed wasn't the angry confrontation they had expected, but something far more challenging. A request for dialogue, for understanding, for acknowledgement that these lives had mattered. "This is what the humans discovered," Zixhari realized, her voice filled with wonder and horror. "They learned to listen to voices we had trained ourselves not to hear. They kept promises we had forgotten we made." The human voice spoke again, gentler now. "Every species in this room once had individuals who said never again after witnessing suffering. You evolved beyond those promises, calling them primitive emotional responses. We chose to keep them instead." Council Leader Vorthak finally found his voice. "What happens now? What do you want from us?" "What we've always wanted," came the reply. "Remember them. Acknowledge what was lost. Promise that their deaths will have meaning. And prove that promise by ensuring it never happens again." The faces on the display waited patiently for an answer, their quantum reconstructed consciousness as real as any living being. The galaxy's leaders realized they faced a choice that would define the future of all known space: continue forgetting or finally learn to remember. Captain Rodriguez materialized on the bridge of the human flagship Promise Keeper exactly 800 years after her rejection by the Galactic Council. But she was no longer the same person who had walked out of that chamber in defeat. Death had not diminished her. If anything, the centuries of waiting had given her a clarity that living beings rarely possessed. The ship itself defied conventional understanding. It existed in normal space, but also touched the quantum realm, where consciousness resided. Its crew included both living humans and the resurrected dead, working together as if the boundary between life and death had simply ceased to matter. "Approaching Council Station," announced Navigator Park, a young woman who had died in the Mars colony disaster 200 years ago. Her quantum reconstructed form looked exactly as she had in life, but her eyes held the wisdom of centuries, spent preparing for this moment. Rodriguez nodded, watching the massive station grow larger on the view screen. "Signal the Council. Tell them we're here to finish the conversation we started 8 centuries ago." The response came immediately from Council Leader Vorthak, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Captain Rodriguez, we didn't expect you to return. We thought you were dead?" Rodriguez smiled, and the warmth in it surprised everyone who heard it. "I was. Death is quite an education, I must say. It teaches you what truly matters, and what doesn't." As the Promise Keeper docked with the station, beings throughout the galaxy watched through emergency broadcasts. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting. It was the moment that would determine whether the galaxy's current order would survive or be replaced by something entirely new. Rodriguez walked through the station's corridors accompanied by a small group of humans, both living and resurrected. The station's inhabitants pressed against the walls as they passed, not in fear, but in fascination. The quantum signatures of the returned dead created a visible aura that made them appear to glow with soft inner light. In the great chamber where she had been rejected 8 centuries ago, Rodriguez found the council waiting. But now she wasn't alone at the center of the room. With her stood representatives of every species that had ever been forgotten: the Yithmari Child, the Consumed Keeper, the Strip-Mined World Spirits, and countless others. "You called us primitive for remembering our dead," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying easily through the vast space. "You called it emotional weakness to honor those who suffered. But look around you now. Which approach created the stronger civilization?" Council Leader Vorthak struggled to find words. The past few days had shattered everything he thought he knew about the universe. We never intended for so many to suffer. We thought we were building a better galaxy." "For whom?" asked the Yithmari Child, her voice carrying the innocence of youth combined with the authority of the dead. "Better for those who survived, perhaps. But what about those who were sacrificed for your progress?" The energy being representative pulsed with confusion. "But you're dead. How can we make amends to beings who no longer exist?" "We exist," said the Consumed Keeper, his form flickering between dimensions. "We've always existed. You simply learned not to see us." Rodriguez stepped forward, and her presence seemed to fill the entire chamber. "The galaxy has been built on a foundation of selective blindness. You learned to ignore the consequences of your actions, to forget the voices of those who suffered for your advancement. You called this evolution, but it was actually a form of spiritual blindness." She gestured to the assembled representatives of the dead. "These beings don't seek revenge. They seek recognition. They want their lives to have meant something. They want their deaths to have prevented similar suffering for others." "What do you propose?" asked Representative Trillath, her metallic feathers trembling. How can we possibly make amends for centuries of actions we can't undo? The same way we did, Rodriguez replied. Make promises to the dead and keep them. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Rodriguez continued, her voice gentle but implacable. Every species in this room will face their victims, experience their suffering, and choose what kind of civilization they want to build. Going forward, some will break under the weight of their actions. Others will emerge transformed. And if we refuse? Asked Council Leader Vorthak. Rodriguez's expression didn't change. Then you'll continue as you are, but with the knowledge that 16 billion human souls are watching your every action, along with the trillions of dead from every species who suffered under your rule. We won't force transformation on you. We'll simply ensure you can never again claim ignorance of the consequences. Dr. Yentar of the Medical Corps spoke up hesitantly. The Kethvar who underwent the transformation, are they still the same beings they were before? They're better, answered a former Kethvar slaver who had accompanied the human delegation. I was Captain Vextar of the Dominion. I spent my life causing suffering without thought or care. Now I feel the pain of every being I ever hurt. But I also feel their forgiveness when I work to heal the damage I caused. He looked around the chamber with eyes that held both sorrow and hope. I'm still me, but I'm me without the ability to ignore the consequences of my actions. For the first time in my life, I understand what it means to truly live rather than simply exist. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. This is what we offer the galaxy. Not conquest, but conversion. Not destruction, but transformation. The choice is yours, but you'll make it with full knowledge of what your past choices have cost. The human delegation began to withdraw, but Rodriguez paused at the chamber's entrance. You have one galactic cycle to decide. Consult with your people, examine your histories, and choose whether you want to continue building civilization on the graves of the forgotten or start building something worthy of honoring both the living and the dead. As the humans departed, the council chamber erupted in frantic discussion. Some delegates called for military action against humanity, but others pointed out the futility of fighting beings who could manipulate space-time itself. More importantly, many had seen something in the faces of the dead that they hadn't expected, not hatred or vengeance, but hope. Over the following months, species across the galaxy began the painful process of confronting their histories. Some civilizations collapsed, as their people couldn't bear the weight of their ancestors' actions. Others emerged stronger, their societies rebuilt on foundations of empathy and remembrance. Humanity had kept their promise to the dead, but in doing so, they had given the living something equally valuable, the chance to build a galaxy worthy of both the victims and the survivors. The age of selective blindness was ending, replaced by an era where memory and conscience would guide the future. The galaxy had recoiled in terror when humanity fulfilled their promise, but as the transformation spread from world to world, terror gave way to something unexpected: gratitude. For the first time in galactic history, civilization was being built not on the graves of the forgotten, but on the foundation of their remembered wisdom. The dead had waited 800 years for justice. Now they would spend eternity ensuring that such waiting would never be necessary again.